Hey, it is really great to be here to critique and go through and learn from this first exercise for which you had no preparation whatsoever. So we knew that the challenges here were going to be keying without having had any formal instruction from me on how to do it, as well as things like areas of contact with the arm and the floor. And then, of course, there was the design component. And as we go through these, you're going to see that most of the students personalized the design of the scene in one way or another. Some of them by animating it, others by rearranging it or using some depth of field type of effects. And that's great. I really love that. And I think as you go through the course and you make the work your own and even get it to a point where you could put it on your reel, I think it's really great to create something that looks uniquely yours, because at the end of the day, you are your own creative director on these. So without further ado, let's take a look at these examples. I've numbered them. So a first example that has a very common problem that we saw here, which was a matte line where the key was at least loose enough to preserve some edge detail. So the key in this case is right here in the root comp, so I can toggle it on and off. And you can see that the background color, even after color adjustment, is darker. And look at just the hair, and you can see we're losing maybe a pixel or two up there. So we could actually do better preserving the soft areas of the hair, but we're not really ruining the look. However, we do have this matte line. One solution for this by a different student, and here I have this proxy. So where I had a render to throw in as a proxy, I went ahead and did it so that I could just scrub through and see it. Here we see the unnatural effect of too much choking of the matte. So the head's looking a little bit alien, but the matte line is gone. So in a sense, that's good. There's also some issues happening here. So the motion blur is kind of being fought with here. And you don't want to get into a fight with motion blur, because motion blur can actually make your key look awesome. But here we're losing detail. All right, so back over here, I do want to show you a quick hack. I don't recommend it exactly, but if you found yourself in a jam with a situation like this, because this particular scene shows this really actually maybe even better than what we had in the lesson. So this was a kind of a difficult key because of this matte line situation combined with the motion blur. I just want to show you, this is also an exemplary scene in that it uses key light, key cleaner, and spill suppressor, which really are the three pro tools built into After Effects for keying, and they will get the job done. There's a curves effect that I can't tell if it's doing anything, but I am going to add to this a matte tool. So under the matte category, I'm going to go with Refine Hard Matte. And instantly the matte line is gone. And additionally, if we look at the alpha channel, and I just solo the layer because otherwise there's nothing to see, you can see that we've actually inadvertently solved a different problem, which I didn't point out, which is that this is not a really, whoops, I just moved my layer. This is not a completed matte. So there's a lot of holes in this matte. And so we fixed that, which is not ideal. But let's say that even those holes weren't there, because you're going to see this matte line in almost all the examples that I'm going to show you. So this would solve that. If we look really closely at the edge, by default, it's messing with the edge a little bit. So let's turn feather to 0. And let's also go here. I don't like it when I scrub controls and downgrade the resolution. So I'm just going to change adaptive resolution in this little menu right here to final quality. And I'm going to change reduce chatter, set that to 0. So I've zeroed out now these controls, and that reintroduced those holes, but that's okay, because what I'm really trying to do is stop messing with the matte itself. still getting messed with a bit. So I need to go under motion blur. I'll just turn it off. And so now I'm not messing with the mat at all. I am, however, solving that edge, almost. So the matte line is gone, but look at her sleeve over here. There's this little thing that pops in because what it's doing is sampling the edge and going, okay, I'm gonna fill with the edge. So where we go from skin to shirt, we're getting this little tag here. Now, that might not seem so bad, like, okay, there's a little stain on her shirt or something. Not really what I wanted, but better than a matte line. It does kind of just suddenly pop on. So there it's not there, and it's suddenly gonna pop on this frame. Not really ideal. So as I said, this is more of a break glass in case of emergency type of measure to quickly select the edge and take control of that matte line. Here's another example where similarly we have a matte line problem. With this one, I just wanted to talk a little bit about project organization. So when a layer name is not helpful, that may be okay with you. But if you're in a situation where anybody else is likely to open your project, you probably want to do better. In fact, I'm just going to say you definitely want to do better. But there's a little bit more to this one. So I dig down, and now I just want to isolate where is the key happening, and I can't tell where it is. So I have middle ground highlighted because I was exploring already, and by soloing each layer, I can figure out like, okay, yeah, it's that one. Keep going. You can see my cheats already where I figured out which layer is which, but we're now 3 deep, and we still are not on the key layer. And that's not necessarily bad, although I think for 5 layers is a heck of a lot, and we're still not there. So in this final 6th deep layer, we get to where the key is happening. Now, here we have a multi-pass key, and that part I think is great. So here's a fill layer, and if we look at the Uber key, what happened, this is brute force roto, which the previous shot we looked at also had to do that fill. That's certainly a way to do it, given that we had green detail on the apron. We'll get into more ways to solve problems like that again in the lesson. But here we also have a separate pass just to fill and then have the external key. One thing I noticed here is they're not quite in harmony. So you can see a little matte hole here. So the matte didn't quite do the job. Sometimes it's outside, like here, it's outside the area that you want to be covering, and now it's kind of inside. So just wanted to point that out. Regarding project organization, I'm going to not harp on that too much, but you're going to see my demonstration projects be quite a bit more, shall we say, efficient. And I know motion graphics, I mean, the great thing is you can work really fast, and it doesn't matter if you have a lot of pre-comps. In visual effects, I'm going to give you 2 separate messages that seem to be conflicting one another. One is go ahead and pre-comp when an element is done, and the other one is to keep your number of layers and pre-comps down to kind of a logical level. And the reason for that is you just do a certain amount of problem solving here, and it just helps if you don't have to dig around and guess what things are. And again, other people you work with will also appreciate it. So now let's talk about points of contact and some other design details. There was a decision you had to make about how the arm is contacting with the cue. And this right here, initially I was drawn to because it's like, well, that's accurate. She was actually leaning on that stack of apple boxes covered in green. So theoretically that was correct, but actually the thing was perpendicular, and you get this big indentation of the arm where there would have been a square corner there. Whereas here, it just looks a little painful. Like, it looks uncomfortable seeing her arm indent like that. So it's something about the angle. It kind of looks like it's cutting into her arm, and the shadow and the way it kind of shows up, is just a little weird. There's soft shadows otherwise, and there's this hard shadow. And that sounds really nitpicky, but it drew my eye. Like this right here, I could accept as being pretty good. And then this comes in, and it just, you got to be careful of things that draw your eye like that, which points of contact and motion will do. In this example, there seems to be some sort of recess, almost like there's a facade on the cue, and then there's like an inch drop before the arm goes in there. So that's not necessarily a really good compromise either. Just kind of getting it to lay in there. That one looks a little recessed. This one I think looks pretty good in that I could imagine there being about that amount of compression on the arm. That one's way inside. I think somewhere in the middle of where it's kind of a reasonable amount of compression on the arm is pretty good. So actually that was the compromise most students made, and that's okay. By the way, there are different types of animations going on here. I'm just going to scrub through to show you this kind of reveal that was done here. And do be careful with things like softness. So the sewing machine is notably very soft, and photographically it should be like a mile away and maybe 500 feet tall to be that soft. And of course, as a designer, you can do what you want. I'm talking about what even the average layperson would look at and go, that doesn't look quite right. So again, the scissors and whatever this thing is over here are pretty much coplanar, although the scissors are also planar with her and these the skein of thread here. So this should go soft there, but that's not what I'm suggesting you do, because this looks way too soft. It's maybe slightly forward, and for that to be soft and these to also be soft that are right behind her means there's some extremely shallow depth of field going on here, which I think just is not supported. I mean, geez, if it was that shallow, the monkey would be kind of partly going out. I don't know. It's a cool look theoretically. And overall, I think this is a good looking frame for color and composition, but I don't think the depth of field is working. One thing I do think is working here is the contact of the feet with the ground. And what's working about them is they don't call my attention. So if we look at this example, and by the way, never name a comp at its default of comp 1. Don't ever do it. I've known employers who say, it's an immediate firing offense if I get any comps back that say comp 1. So just don't do it. And here we have no contact with the ground, and she looks like she's floating. The Q logo had a bit of a shadow. There's no real distance between these feet and the floor, and therefore you need what are called contact shadows. Now I've highlighted them here in the timeline. I have this proxied, so let me turn off the proxy for a moment, and we'll just see how simply you can solve that. If she was moving around left to right with feet on the floor, you could cut out her key and isolate her feet, make them black and move them down a few pixels. And that could be one way. But, there's an awkwardness with doing that because the movement actually should be in opposition. So as she raises her toe, that should actually make the shadow even maybe move the other way, which this animation is doing a little bit. Anyway, the point there, and with the depth of field, is just don't draw our attention to something that's clearly really wrong. Okay, again, very soft sewing machine. I know that was there in one of the Photoshop comps, but something you're going to want to manage. Monkey kind of comes peeking in here. That's a cute idea. This one made a stronger choice, just turning the background white, kind of refreshing. I think that the composition and the depth of field is really good here. Shadow's not really working, but there was kind of a decision to just sort of punt. Actually, there is a bit of a contact shadow there. I'm not convinced by it. And this key is probably the most successful overall. And I will point out, if I dig in here, that this did make use of a animated fill mat for the skirt. And on the master, there is that refine hard matte trick to get rid of matte lines. If we look at just the alpha channel, you can see that refine matte effect does break this a little bit. So it wasn't set down to 0 the way I did. It actually had additional feather to soften what was a pretty hard matte, and you pay a price with this tool. So if you're gonna use it with a key, you gotta zero it out the way that I said, or you're gonna start to see stuff like that. But in any case, this person seemed a little bit more comfortable with key light and did some adjustment of the screen matte controls, as we will do in next week's lessons. So that's kind of it overall. And again, commendable job, everyone, for doing this. And I encourage you maybe to put this away for now, but in a few weeks' time, I think you could probably, in a very short order, refine what you did and get it into what would look much more like an actual ident piece, if you want that for your reel or just for the satisfaction of having completed it.